These places are not just haunted on paper. They leave witnesses with questions they cannot answer. Starting with the place locals call the Deadwood Corridor, deep in a stretch of Appalachian hollows, the story begins where the map seems to run out. The most bizarre haunted sites in America will take you through mansions that refuse to stay empty, bridges that swallow cars without leaving marks, and lighthouses whose lights flicker like a heartbeat long after the keepers are gone. We will follow reports, read old police logs, listen to people who still live with the fear, and examine a few pieces of evidence that refuse to fit tidy explanations. There is a human face to each mystery. There was Jonah Reed, who went out to check on his cattle and never came home. Search teams combed the ridges for days and found his jacket snagged on a branch and nothing else. For months, detectives and volunteer crews kept digging. Forensic teams ran tests on soil samples and fibers, and even a retired historian pulled out brittle newspapers to track the pattern of disappearances. New interviews have surfaced, and an amateur sonar operator claims to have recorded an anomaly under the river. Join me as we walk the edge of these places, respectful to those who suffered and relentless in pursuit of the facts. Prepare yourself for evidence that chills the spine and details that refuse to add up. The geography matters. These sites cluster in transitional landscapes where human structures meet wild spaces. In the Appalachians, weathered stone and shale create caverns and sinkholes known only to hunters and old-timers. Along the northeastern coast, narrow inlets and tidal flats hide swift currents and shifting sandbars that can change in a single storm. In the Midwest, abandoned railway cuts and forgotten service roads sit under foggy canopies of trees where sound travels oddly and compasses wobble for reasons no one can agree on. Local architecture feeds the stories. A Victorian mansion with a cellar that sinks a foot into wet earth every winter becomes a character in itself. A concrete lighthouse perched on an eroding jetty seems to look out over water and back in time at the same time. Folklore threads through all of this. People like Margaret Ellis, a local historian, remember songs and warnings passed down by families who would not cross certain bridges after dark. That cultural memory mixes with official records and eyewitness testimony to form the web we will untangle. Our first cluster of sites begins with a mansion that never quite left the 19th century, a bridge that eats engine blocks, and a river bend nicknamed the Ghost S-Curve. At Holloway Mansion, owners came and went, but the curtains always seemed to move from the inside. The property has been photographed in the rain, and the pictures show water beating on windows while the interior is bone dry. Conversation between researchers and residents often sounds like testimony. At one neighborhood meeting, the owner Evelyn Carter said, "I heard footsteps on the third floor at 2 in the morning." A neighbor, Paul Nguyen, replied, "I have a photograph of a light in an upstairs window when the house was empty." An investigator named Ethan Cole responded, "We cataloged those photos and found layers of dust displaced in impossible patterns." A volunteer, Amy Brooks, added, "We set up motion cameras and they recorded shapes moving through rooms without opening doors." In that scene, the senses crowd in. You can see the peeling wallpaper shining under damp bulbs. Hear the scuffing of shoes on creaking boards. Smell the sour note of standing water from a leaky foundation. Feel the cold draft that bypasses closed windows. And taste the metallic tang of old pipes when screws came loose. Holloway Mansion has a backstory of its own, but it also reveals a pattern of objects moved but no signs of forced entry, rooms cold to the touch, and a family photo that appears in 2 different places at once in photographs taken minutes apart. Glass River Bridge sits 4 miles downstream. On foggy nights, the bridge has swallowed vehicles without witnesses reporting anything at the scene. A truck belonging to Javier Lopez was found at the bottom of a shallow pool with the taillights still warm and no sign of the driver. Detective Ruth Harper recounted to a small crowd, "We pulled the vehicle up and the key was in the ignition, but there was no blood, no footprints, nothing on the banks."
Diver Tom Adler, who led the recovery, said, "The sediment under that pool is like quick clay in places. You sink and you do not come up. The sensory details are stark. The water is dark and smells of tannins and old iron. When you stand on the bridge, you hear a low humming through the concrete that feels like a throat clearing. The air tastes of river silt after rain. The sound of the wind through the railings is hollow and lingers like a voice you almost recognize." Witnesses include Linda Carter, who claims she saw headlights on the span that vanished into the mist, and volunteer searcher Mark Douglas, who remembers the sound of an engine that suddenly cut out. In the recovery log, divers reported odd readings on sonar, irregular shapes that might be tree roots or might be something else. Soil samples were sent for grain size analysis, and a forensic geologist noted unusual compaction layers that hinted at sudden collapsing patches. The Ghost S-curve is a river bend that local anglers avoid. Families have told tales of boats drifting away from moorings and of men who rowed out and simply stopped responding when shouted at. In one case, a teenager named Sarah Martin drifted away from shore, and when rescuers reached the spot, her oars were still in the boat and the life jacket folded neatly on the seat. Witnesses gave statements that conflict in small details
and agree in terrifying ways. There is an exchange from an interview that still sits in a file. Rescuer Anthony Hale said, "We found the boat and called her name." Friend Rachel Bennett replied, "We screamed until our throats hurt, but she did not answer." Anthony said, "The water smelled of leaves and something putrid." Rachel said, "I could not reach her with the pole, yet the boat did not drift." The senses in that rescue are sharp. The surface of the water reflected a pale moon fragment as if the whole river had been cut out. The sound of insects fell away like a curtain. The moss underfoot was slipperier than anything either rescuer remembered. A faint chemical sting lurked at the back of the nose, and the rescue pole reverberated with a dull thud when it struck nothing at all. Local lore, recorded by Margaret Ellis, links these three locations with an old logging route that shifted course during floods decades ago. The police logs show searches that lasted days and involved canine units, but no consistent explanation emerged. The central figure in our investigation is Ethan Cole. Ethan grew up on the edge of a coal town where his mother worked at the mill and his father read maps for a living. As a child, Ethan learned to read the gaps between roads and to notice the way old houses refused to settle the same way twice. A formative night came when he was 12 and his older brother Ben vanished from a country road after headlights passed and no other vehicles were present. The family searched for months and found only Ben's scarf caught on a fence post a quarter-mile from where he had been last seen. That loss pushed Ethan into a life of asking unsparing questions. He studied criminal justice and archaeology, blending techniques from both fields, and spent early career nights cataloging evidence in cold rooms and learning to interview people without pushing them away. Today, Ethan runs a small investigative collective, consults with forensic labs on odd finds like hair fibers that do not match any known local genetic markers, and travels to the oldest records in county archives to trace patterns. He is meticulous and restless because the unknown refuses to stay unknown when he feels a case is unresolved. One landmark case becomes our emotional and investigative centerpiece. In the winter of 1989, a family named Parkers drove toward the coast for a holiday and ended up at Gray Point Lighthouse where they were planning to meet relatives. Only the car returned. The vehicle was found in the parking lot with the engine cold and both doors locked. Inside were the family bags, a half-drunk thermos, and a grocery list. No bodies were ever recovered. That incident is where science and folklore collided. Forensic pathologist Dr. Annika Bose examined fibers and the thermos and noted minute traces of marine microalgae that could only have formed in shallow tidal pools in a certain light condition. Diver Tom Adler took sonar sweeps around the nearby jetty and returned images of a concavity in the seabed that did not match any known erosion patterns. Ethan and historian Margaret Ellis reviewed shipping logs and found an old entry about a storm surge that shifted a boulder field and created a temporary lagoon in the 1930s. During interviews, a keeper named Harold Jensen insisted he saw the lighthouse light blink 3 times at midnight long after the electricity had been shut off. There are lengthy dialogues in the case files. Ethan asked Harold, "Where were you on the night the Parkers vanished?" Harold answered, "I was on the jetty. I heard singing, and then I saw the light blink and a fog like a wall rolled in." Ethan pressed, "Did you see anyone?" Harold said, "No shapes, just the light and the sound." Dr. Bose added, "The thermos had traces of sea salt and something else we could not identify." Harold said, "The sound was like children at play and like waves at the same time." The scene evokes senses that haunt a memory. The lighthouse oil lamp metal tasted bitter when held by the keeper decades later. The stairwell smelled of brine and stale rope. The granite steps rang hollow under boots. The wind through the lantern room sounded like someone whispering names. And the salt stung the eyes of anyone who climbed to look out over the jetty. Tension moment 1 unfolds when divers entered the concavity found on sonar. They lowered a camera into the shallow basin, and the image showed what looked like a swath of polished stones arranged in a circle. The footage blanked and returned with distortion. In the log, the team leader Tom Adler narrated, "We saw shapes in the silt, then the feed went grainy." Team member Amy Brooks radioed, "We felt a pressure like being pulled off balance even though tide was slack." Recorder Ethan said, "The audio on the feed had a low humming that we did not pick up on surface microphones." The sensory detail is immediate. The water was visually glassy and then shredded by an invisible current. The sound picked up on the recorder was like a choir underwater. The divers reported a cold that sank through their suits. Their gloves felt tacky as if coated in algae. And the taste of metal surfaced when they surfaced to speak. The experience left the crew shaken, and the footage was logged as anomalous. Tension moment 2 occurs at Holloway Mansion when overnight equipment recorded a pattern of knocks at precise intervals that did not match any natural settling. On playback, the knocks had a cadence and then a staccato burst that coincided with the disappearance of a family heirloom from a locked cabinet. In the transcript, curator Paul Nguyen said, "I was present when the cabinet was checked and bolts were intact." Volunteer Linda Carter said, "I saw a light pass under the door as if something slid along the hall." Ethan noted, "The dust pattern shows a hand impression and then a hairline crack that radiates outward." The senses stitch themselves tighter. The temperature in the hallway dropped rapidly. An old perfume smell emerged, though no bottle was present. The wood underfoot felt oily rather than dry. Faint music like a gramophone played for a breath and then stopped. And the air pressure shifted so ears popped. The night register included multiple witness statements that matched the recording, and yet no mechanical explanation could be identified. Tension moment 3 reaches a peak on Glass River Bridge when a volunteer named Mark Douglas reported that his wristwatch stopped and then restarted 6 minutes later with the time altered as if it had lost time. He described a moment when the fog condensed into a wall and a low vibration moved through the guardrail that made his teeth ache. In the interview, Detective Ruth Harper asked Mark, "Can you describe what you felt?" Mark answered, "My chest tightened, and I heard voices speaking at the edge of hearing." Rescue diver Tom Adler said, "We all felt the same pressure and experienced a sense of direction going wrong." The sensory load is claustrophobic. The fog tastes of iron and old motor oil. The sound of traffic far off changes pitch like a dropped needle. The light from your flashlight bends oddly and fills with static. Your fingers prickle as if tiny insects brushed them, and your feet sink fractionally into the asphalt as if the road is thicker than it should be. The combined reports pushed the police to request a geotechnical survey, and unusual electromagnetic anomalies were recorded near the center span. After these scenes, we slow to analyze evidence and theories. There are competing explanations that range from geological to criminal to paranormal. Geologists point to karst formations and sudden subsidence in the Holloway area. A geotechnical report by Professor Alan Whitaker details sinkhole risk and notes the presence of concealed voids and rapid changes in groundwater, which could account for sudden collapses and pockets of trapped air that give the impression of voices. For the bridge and the river, forensic hydrologists cite shifting sediment beds, whirlpools created by submerged logs, and sudden eddies that can trap a person or a boat with astonishing speed. In the Parkers case, some suggest foul play or deliberate staging, yet neither missing bodies nor reliable motives have been established. On the technical side, DNA analysis was performed on hair found at Holloway and returned partial matches that do not correspond to any known databases. Carbon dating of wooden fragments recovered near Glass River gave dates inconsistent with documented construction, suggesting older structures underlie modern roads. Electromagnetic surveys near Gray Point show spikes that correlate with witness accounts of lights and sounds. The multiplicity of methods matters. You cannot rely on one discipline to explain everything. Interviews and testimonials remain central. Detective Ruth Harper said, "We cannot rule anything out until we reconcile the physical evidence with what people are reporting." Historian Margaret Ellis said, "Stories persist because they point to repeated patterns we cannot ignore." If these stories unsettled you so far, know you are not alone. Many of you grew up near places with strange histories. Have you ever felt a place was watching you? Type yes or no and in one line tell us what you experienced. If you can give the name of the place or a document you hold, include it. Comments have helped us locate witnesses and even old photos that reopen cases. If you were ever there after dark and felt something off, share the approximate year and what you smelled or heard. We read every comment and follow up where possible. Community information has triggered new leads before, and your detail could be the key to another search. Now back to the evidence we can check. We reached out to multiple experts. Dr. Anika Bose explained how trace microalgae can adhere to fabric and survive in pockets for years if conditions are right, and how that can mislead investigators about when an object was exposed to water. Professor Whitaker walked us through soil stratigraphy and explained how a temporary scouring event can create depressions that later fill and preserve anomalies. Detective Harper described the limits of eyewitness memory and how repeated storytelling alters details. Diver Tom Adler demonstrated sonar patterns and explained why certain echoes might look like a human form yet arise from twisted metal or submerged timber. Historian Margaret Ellis dug into county files and found similar incidents recorded under different names going back a century, creating a chronology that suggests cycles rather than isolated events. The closing asks us to balance empathy and curiosity. These are not entertainment only. Families like the Reeds and the Parkers carry loss and uncertainty. We must honor that by searching ethically and by sharing what we find with humility. The evidence we gathered does not produce a single answer. It produces a collection of hard facts and baffling anomalies that demand further study. Some of the best next steps are simple. We need more ground-penetrating radar runs under the Holloway property, DNA reanalysis with expanded databases for the hair samples, extended sonar sweeps in the Ghost S-curve with different frequencies, and archival searches that pursue shipping ledgers and old weather reports. We will return to follow the leads that seem most promising. If you want us to keep digging, subscribe. We approach each case with research and respect and bring interviews with family members, divers, detectives, and historians. Subscribing helps us fund lab analyses and travel to archives. We will publish updates when tests conclude and sometimes reopen cases when new evidence turns up. 1 month update. We received a tip from a reader who sent a 1974 photograph showing a light in the Holloway attic window that predates the most recent owners. We are comparing the image to our night footage. 3 months update. The lab returned preliminary results on the hair sample and found it lacks a match in current databases. We are sending samples for deeper sequencing. 6 months update. A new sonar sweep found a second concavity near Gray Point. Divers will investigate once permits are approved. In the end, what remains are fragments of lives and a map of places that resist tidy explanations. Vivid items like a sweater snagged on a branch, a grocery list lying untouched in a cold car, or a pattern of knocks that leaves a family unsettled do not let us walk away easily. We will keep reporting, keep asking for documents, and keep inviting those with memories to come forward. If you think you have evidence or a memory that could help write the next chapter, send it in the comments. Thank you for staying with this investigation. Remember to be careful when you travel near places where the map seems to end, because sometimes history and geography conspire to make ordinary routes into strange thresholds. Until next time, stay curious and keep looking at the places that others have learned to avoid.